Revenge with Karen. I knew something was off when the janitor looked surprised to see me still working in what used to be the mailroom. Not a joke. They called it Archive 3C on the door, but the fluorescent hum, cracked linoleum, and the family of spiders living behind the baseboard said otherwise. It smelled like old toner and forgotten promotions. And right in the middle of this forgotten sarcophagus sat my rack, humming along like it always had, lowing gently in its cage like a tired old dog that still guarded the house while the family slept. Most folks at Caro Tech didn't even know what it did anymore. Hell, some assumed it was unplugged, including, apparently, our new VP of Infrastructure, Tyler Lang, the kind of guy who wore designer loafers to server rooms and used the phrase synergize without irony. He popped in on my second week of exile, all swagger and peppermint breath, poked at the cables like they were decorative ivy, and said, "This your little museum exhibit, Rachel." Cute. Then he chuckled and made a show of reading the sticker I'd slapped on the side. "Do not power down, critical live feed." His response, "That's adorable. Legacy hardware should come with a plaque and a eulogy." He patted the top of the rack like it was a therapy llama, and walked out before I could tell him it was currently feeding 43% of our national analytics dashboard through a silent bypass relay, a fact that saved the company during the last data center outage, while his cloud-first miracle was throwing 502 errors like rice at a wedding. Thing is, I could have told him, but I didn't, because I'd been through this before. I'd survived 4 CIOs, 2 acquisitions, and a multi-million-dollar Oracle migration that almost buried the stock price. I knew the playbook. First, they change the org chart. Then they change the chairs. Then they come for the people who remember what was written on the whiteboards before the IPO. And then, when they screw something up, they go hunting for someone who used to be responsible for that process. Best case, you're in an exit interview eating dry and MTKS from an HR bowl. Worst case, you're blamed for the plug they pulled themselves. So I stayed quiet, smiled, and waited, because this wasn't about proving I was right. It was about knowing when to be right. Now, before I get deeper into this, if you're one of the 93% who listen to stories like this without subscribing, don't be like Tyler. Pay attention to what's actually powering the good stuff. Hit that subscribe and like button, it's free, and yeah, really does help the team behind these stories keep the rack humming. All right, back to the carnage. My title stayed the same on paper, Senior Systems Integration Lead, but I lost my team, my access to 2 core dashboards, and my slot in the daily infrastructure sync. They said it was just for optics to make room for Tyler's streamlined org vision. Translation: I made too much money to be visible, and too much sense to be included. Couldn't fire me without triggering a legacy severance clause, buried 3 versions deep in my original contract. So they did the next best thing, they buried me. Problem is, I like the dark. You see things others miss. Like the way Tyler's migration to the new vendor platform skipped 3 stages of compliance just so he could hit his Q3 KPI bonus. Or the fact that during one particularly suspicious failover test, my rack took over for a failing live node, and not one person on the call acknowledged it. I checked the logs. I printed the logs. I started emailing myself PDFs, a digital diary of ghosts. The truth was, they thought they'd decommissioned everything I'd built. They hadn't. Not fully. Because Tyler didn't bother to read the handover diagrams, just made PowerPoints about cloud elasticity, and barked orders down Slack threads like a man who'd never had a terminal window stare back at him with an error he couldn't Google. That rack in the corner still had its teeth, and it was still biting. He strutted around like he owned the future, but that old hardware was holding the leash, and I was holding the leash on the hardware. By week 3, Tyler had purged half the IT floor. He called it right sizing. He was trimming hedges, not livelihoods. I watched a guy with 20 years and 2 kids get replaced by a bootcamp grad who thought Raid was a type of energy drink. The rest of us got assigned smiley-face training modules about cloud transition literacy. Tyler made the rounds in his crisp shirts and fake humility, calling it a new era for Caro Tech's infrastructure. You could smell the bonus metrics wafting off him like Axe body spray and shame. Everything had to be cloud native. On paper, that meant scalable, containerized, and vendor agnostic. In practice, it meant Tyler picked the cheapest AWS region and bypassed 3 security reviews. I knew it because the dashboard started glitching every time East Ohio had a thunderstorm. But nobody wanted to hear it. Not legal, not ops. Definitely not Tyler, who once said, and I quote, "Disaster recovery is fear-based architecture." That was the moment I knew we were in for blood. I started doing what any woman with a ticking time bomb under her desk would do. I opened a folder. It lived in a hard copy binder, one of those ugly Office Depot ones with fraying plastic edges and a spine label that just said notes. Harmless, boring. That binder would end up costing Tyler his job, but not yet. I wasn't after revenge. I was after proof. And proof takes patience. First, traced every request Tyler made through Jira, which he never closed properly, and cross-referenced it with our vendor bills and a little thing called uptime logs. The patterns were grotesque. He'd kill a failover node to shave hours off migration time. He sunsetted legacy backups without ensuring the cloud equivalents were tested. But the most glorious oversight, he never disconnected my rack. You see, the new system was supposed to be standalone, Ming Tower of digital purity. But when the traffic hit spikes during the nightly syncs, especially East Coast financial feeds, the system quietly failed over to my dusty, humming museum piece. And Tyler didn't know. Why? Because he had blocked me from the alerts channel. But he didn't block the system itself. The system still trusted me. So every night, around 2:11 a.m., I get a quiet little ping on my backup monitoring script. Rack failover triggered. Duration, 17 minutes. And then another. And another. Some nights it would handle 40% of the load and slide right back under the covers before sunrise. Like a guilty priest returning from a sin he pretended didn't happen. I started emailing myself the failover logs. Then I started exporting them to PDFs. I created a Gmail label called Lang Insurance. Every time-stamped incident, every support ticket he marked resolved without action, every deviation from policy went into that folder. I even printed a few just in case someone accidentally wiped my machine. Call me paranoid, but paranoia has a funny way of becoming foresight when middle-aged white men start sweating in quarterly reviews. Then came the vendor audit. Tyler strutted into that meeting like a man who'd personally invented virtualization, talked about horizontal elasticity and cost efficiency while I sat in the back row with a legal pad and a thermos full of peppermint tea. The vendor rep asked, "What's your contingency load test threshold?" Tyler blinked, smiled, said, "We don't believe in over-engineering." That was the moment the audit rep started typing something into his iPad. I never saw what it was, but I bet it rhymed with liability. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. That was the game. Moment you speak up, you become the distraction. The angry woman in the server room, the fossil, the problem. But problems can be moved. Patterns cannot. I watched Tyler take credit for metrics my rack was still secretly upholding. Watched him post Slack updates about record-breaking uptime while my little script beeped in the background like a heartbeat in a body they assumed was dead. He had no idea, or maybe he did and just didn't care. But I did. I was counting. It showed up on a Tuesday, buried halfway down in a batch of innocuous-looking PDFs titled Q4 Infra Streamlining Approvals. Just a formality, the email said. Signature request for legacy decom scheduling, need by EOD. No subject line. No meeting. Just a smiley face emoji in the body and a BCC list that might as well have included a shovel and a shallow grave. The file was called decom KF final PDF. Rookie move. If it says final, it's either a lie or a ticking bomb with a glitter bow. I opened it, and there it was, right on page 3, buried between budget line items and HR-approved adjectives. Legacy systems previously maintained by Rachel Foster will be formally retired from production use, effective immediately. Any future incidents related to decommissioned systems will not be under the scope of current infrastructure leadership. I swear I could hear him giggling when he wrote it. The clause was wrapped in so much vague language it practically whistled as it slid past compliance. But I'd seen it before, in another company, another decade, when they tried to bury an engineer's retirement clause under a printer refresh policy. The second I read that line, I knew what Tyler was really doing. If I signed that memo, I wasn't just authorizing a hardware shutdown, I was giving him a legal fireproof vest. Any crash, any breach, any fallout tied to the rack or its feeds would be pinned to the woman who confirmed it was no longer active. Me, the ghost in Archive 3C. He could take the credit when it worked and toss me under the bus when it didn't. I smiled, hit reply all with the casual energy of a tired librarian, and typed, "Hey, thanks for this, quick note. Just want to clarify a couple points with finance before I sign." Sent over a few red lines, attached. Should only be minor. I attached a new draft of the memo. Same title. Except my version had a few red question marks, a bolded sentence around asset ownership continuity, a passive-aggressive footnote quoting the original disaster recovery policy from 6 years ago. Just to keep things spicy. Tyler replied 5 hours later. "Hey Rachel, this doesn't need finance approval, just your sign-off. Trying to wrap this up by COB. Translation, stop poking holes. Just die quietly, dinosaur." I let it sit. Wednesday came. He pinged me again. This time in Slack. Ping, any movement on the memo. Just want to keep the train moving, locomotive. I replied with a thumbs-up emoji and a message. Should be good soon. Just clearing a couple terminology things with finance. That was a lie. I hadn't even talked to finance. I didn't need to. The memo was never getting signed. Thursday morning, I made a tiny edit to the memo file's title. I added draft 1 to the end, uploaded it again. Sent a new email. "Thanks for your patience. I think this is close." Just confirming one final thing with asset tracking. Friday, he called me, like actually dialed the phone. That was new. "Hey Rachel, just wondering where we are on the sign-off," he said, trying to sound casual, but with that up-register pitch guys get when their throat's too tight. "Oh, sorry, Tyler. I've been heads down. I think there's a weird clause about vendor accountability we're still trying to match to the current policy language. Want me to loop an audit?" Pause. No, let's not overcomplicate it. It's really just a formality, exactly. A formality that had become a noose. I spent the weekend printing backup copies of my logs and updating the folder. I added a new section, decommissioning attempts 09/12 through present. I wasn't documenting anymore, I was preparing. By Monday, Tyler had gone quiet. The kind of quiet that precedes either a desperate push or a complete meltdown. Both are useful. Memo stayed unsigned. The rack kept humming. And Tyler, he started showing up at meetings early, like he was trying to prove something. I just kept drinking my tea, highlighting log files, and smiling like I didn't know the memo's timestamp would end up as Exhibit B. The email came down from the top floor like a thunderclap. Q3 board review, full infrastructure performance report required. Kind of all-hands-on-deck situation that makes middle managers sweat through their polos and engineers recheck every failover node twice. Investor eyes were watching. Big eyes. If anything hiccuped during that live feed, if a dashboard stalled, a latency bar spiked, or one graph misaligned by half a pixel, it wouldn't just be an oopsie. It'd be a scandal. Tyler, of course, saw it as his Super Bowl. He practically danced into the prep meeting, clapping his hands like an off-brand motivational speaker, and saying things like, "Time to show the board how lean and mean we've become." What he meant was, time to stand in front of the results of Rachel's decades of work and pretend I'm Zeus handing fire to mortals. He had the gall, the actual, vocal cords-enabled gall, to say, "Might just yank the last plug on the legacy, trash myself before the show." Symbolic gesture. Said this while sipping from a monogrammed mug that read "Think Bigger." Legacy trash. That's what he called the only piece of hardware quietly keeping the main data pipeline from vaporizing every time the cloud burped. My rack, sitting there in Archive 3C, duct-taped to life, and still feeding real-time compliance data faster than his shiny new vendor stack. And now he wanted to kill it live. For symbolism, I didn't flinch. I nodded, wrote something in my notebook. I excused myself, walked straight back to my corner of the underworld and started printing. Logs, red lines, incident reports, vendor warnings, Slack threads, everything that had even a whiff of Tyler Lang's fingerprints got printed, 3-hole punched and filed. I used a red Sharpie to mark key pages. One folder, black, unassuming, no logos, just a single word scrawled in capital letters on the label, Conway. Conway was the name. Contractor Tyler had brought in under the radar to help accelerate cloud migration. A guy whose LinkedIn endorsed him for blockchain fluency and visioneering. The same guy who'd been tied to a vendor-side outage at my last company, a name I'd flagged before, buried deep in an email to compliance 6 months ago. They never followed up. Tyler probably buried it, but I didn't. I backed up everything to 2 flash drives. One went in the folder. The other, tucked into a hollowed-out backup battery behind the rack. I had no plans to use it, unless Then, just before I left for the weekend, I folded a single sheet of paper, clean, white, untouched. I wrote one name in black ink, just one, Conway. I slid it into my purse, right between my Metro card and a half-used pack of gum, just in case, because I'd seen how this played out. The theater of corporate bravado. The egos bloated on buzzwords, men who thought unplugging a machine was the same as defeating the woman who built it. I'd seen them before. Some got promoted. Some got escorted out under silence and HR nods. This time, I wasn't betting on luck. I was betting on timing. And the funny thing about timing, it starts with knowing the exact second someone's hand touches the wrong cable. So I went home, poured myself a glass of wine, and listened to the low, constant hum of my rack through the security feed I'd set up 2 years ago, back when the first CIO told me we were modernizing for agility. That feed never went offline, because I never went offline. Come Monday, they'd all be watching the dashboards. The board would be sipping catered coffee and nodding along to Tyler's buzzword bingo. No one would look at me, boxed into my little off-grid cell like a forgotten relic. But I'd be watching the time. I knew the exact moment it would all go black. 10:06 a.m. That was the moment. I was watching the live feed from Archive 3C on my phone, just a muted, low-res security cam with a timestamp overlay in the corner. Tyler had strutted into the room like he was entering a TED stage, flanked by 2 junior engineers who looked like they were still paying off student loans. One of them hesitated near the rack, probably out of respect, or maybe superstition. Tyler didn't. He reached down, not even checking which cable, not even verifying load state, and yanked the main power line like he was starting a lawnmower. The rack gave a subtle whine as the fans spun down. Lights dimmed, then flickered out. He looked at the camera as if he knew I was watching and smirked. Full teeth. The kind of smile that says, "Look, Dad, I killed the old guard." Then, as if he were baptizing the entire operation in ego, he said, loud enough for the hallway mic to catch it, "We're live now. Time to move on." I looked down at the screen. 10:06 a.m. Noted, I locked the phone. Slipped it into my purse. Took a long sip of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. And walked without urgency to the second-floor conference room where the quarterly board meeting was already underway. They were all there, board members in gray suits and gray moods, analysts half-watching data feeds scroll across their tablets, the CFO tapping something into his phone, and Tyler at the podium, basking in the fluorescent stage light like a man who thought he was about to be immortalized in a stock photo titled Tech Visionary Presence to Board. He was mid-spiel about agile pipelines and elastic compute costs when I took my seat against the wall. No nameplate, no eye contact, perfect. Just another ghost at the feast, and 12 a.m. The graphs were still dancing, fed by momentum and caching, and the dying embers of redundant systems that hadn't yet realized their heart had stopped beating. It's like when a person flatlines in a movie, but the ventilator keeps pumping for a few more seconds. Tyler was explaining latency improvements in Q3. Someone asked about East Coast load averages. 10:21 a.m. I crossed my legs, casually opened my notebook, checked the script output log I had printed that morning. The last successful failover heartbeat was at 10:05:42 a.m. I looked up. 10:24 a.m. It was subtle at first. The CFO's tablet screen hiccuped. One of the dashboards froze mid-refresh, still showing the 10:15 mark. An analyst tapped his laptop trackpad twice. Nothing. The dashboard feed, the one projected onto the wall, on a loading circle like it was trying to decide whether to die with dignity or kick and scream. The room got quieter, but not alarmed. Not yet. Not until the West Coast compliance feed failed to load. Not until the financial dashboard threw a red error. Not until one brave soul near the back muttered, "Is this real time?" Tyler glanced at the screen, blinking. The CEO, a man I'd seen fire 3 VPs over coffee, slowly turned his head, turtle-like. Or Tyler, "Is this feed live?" Tyler smiled, but it was brittle now. "Might be a network, no," I said softly. It was the first word I'd spoken in that room in over 6 months. Everyone turned. I stood up slowly, reached into my purse, and pulled out the folded piece of paper. Walked over to the CEO. No drama, no music swell. Just a quiet rustle of paper and 18 months of ignored warnings. He opened it. Read the name. His face didn't contort, just changed. The way a face does when the puzzle clicks and the last piece turns out to be a gun. Then he stood. So fast his chair toppled backward and hit the floor with a crack. He didn't say a word, just walked out. And Tyler, he watched him go, eyes darting, lips parted, the projector still frozen behind him. Graphs flatlined, dashboards dead. I sat back down, crossed my legs again, and waited. The silence didn't last long. Moment the CEO's footsteps vanished down the hallway, it was like someone lit a fuse under the table. The projector blinked, coughed, and threw a Colonel Panic message across the wall for all to see. One board member actually said, "What the hell is that?" Like the screen had just grown a tumor. An engineer burst through the door, red-faced and already sweating, headset bouncing around his neck like a loose stethoscope. "We've got node failures across zones B and D. Syncs out, failover didn't trigger." He glanced around and then, God bless his naive little heart, looked directly at Tyler. "Did we power down any legacy infrastructure today?" Tyler turned white. You could see the realization break across his face like a windshield hit by a baseball bat. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. Then tried something in the middle, a sort of flapping sound, like a goldfish trying to recite a legal disclaimer. Shouldn't, that rack wasn't even in production. "I was told," he stammered, already reaching for his laptop like he could Control-Z a physical act of stupidity. Another engineer appeared behind him with a wireless mouse and panic in her voice. "The East Coast dashboard is gone, like gone. Data source can't be reached." The CFO was no longer tapping on his phone. He was staring straight at me. And then came the words, not angry, not condescending, just surgical. "Rachel, can you explain what just happened?" I didn't move at first. Let the question hang in the room like a slow-drifting snowflake with razors for edges. Then, calmly, I reached into my bag. Not for the folder, not yet, but for the same folded note I'd already handed the CEO minutes earlier. I opened it, wrote a name on the back in sharp, even letters. Conway. Then I stood, walked to the table, and slid it across to the CFO. Picked it up, read it, and passed it along to legal. It moved like a virus down the line, each new set of eyes widening just a bit more. One of the board members leaned toward the others and whispered something. Another looked toward the projector, then at Tyler, then at me, like he was watching someone finally see the monster in the mirror. The engineer who'd burst in, he took a step back like the air had gotten colder. Tyler tried to recover. "This is a setup," he barked. "He's just trying to." "Don't," I said quietly. He stopped mid-sentence. The room was now frozen, not in confusion, not in chaos, but in focus. That terrifying stillness when people stop thinking about blame and start thinking about fallout. The CIO leaned forward. "Rachel, that name, Conway, why does it matter?" I didn't answer, not yet. The CEO re-entered the room. His suit jacket was off. He was holding his phone like it had personally insulted him, walked straight to the board chair and whispered something, low and fast. Then he turned to Tyler. "You brought in a vendor flagged for breach investigations at your previous firm?" His voice was calm, ice in a velvet glove. Tyler opened his mouth again, but the CEO raised a single finger. "No, just that." The board chair stood up. "We're calling an emergency session. Clear the room. Rachel, stay." The engineers fled like roaches at sunrise. Legal stayed. CFO stayed. Tyler, he looked like someone had pulled his plug. I didn't smile, didn't gloat, because this wasn't joy. This was release. Cold, clinical, absolute. This was what it felt like to watch gravity return to a place where arrogance once floated untethered. 3 months before Tyler ever set foot in Caro Tech, I saw the name pop up in a vendor onboarding memo, Conway Solutions Limited. Small print, tiny contract, slipped in under a temporary migration consultancy clause. I was combing through our internal procurement logs, not because it was my job, but because I like to know what wolves are crawling through the firewall in grandma's clothes. Conway wasn't some fly-by-night shop from LinkedIn. No, I knew Conway. Back at HelixNet, 6 years ago, they were brought in by another Golden Boy exec trying to cut corners and fluff his resume. The result? A 38-hour outage, $2.7 million in SLA violations, and a federal compliance probe that quietly vanished after someone got promoted out of responsibility. I remembered the name because I had to rebuild a reporting server from literal scratch using backup tapes that still smelled like mildew. So when I saw Conway again, wearing a fake mustache and coming in through Tyler's backdoor clause, I started documenting. Not raising alarms, not yelling, just watching, because I knew if I flagged it too early, it'd be filed under emotional resistance to change, corporate code for she's in the way. I'd be written off before they even read the subject line. And then, bit by bit, Conway's fingerprints started showing up on the actual bones of the system. improper credential handling, version mismatches between production and staging, back-end scripts with no redundancy, and worst of all, Tyler quietly greenlit Conway to bypass our compliance checklist, called it a pilot exception. The board never saw that line. The CEO didn't either, but I did, so I printed it, highlighted it, filed it under Lang Insurance. Meanwhile, every time the rack picked up the slack, when failover hit, or when compliance load spikes threatened to crash the dashboards, I could see Conway's system silently flailing. My rack caught it, like a seatbelt no one knew they were still wearing. They thought the cloud stack was holding everything. It wasn't. My relic was still carrying them, and Conway's modern solution was the dead weight. But I said nothing, just watched. Until 10:24 a.m. Back in the boardroom, the CEO stood next to the whiteboard, arms crossed, jaw locked. He'd asked for everything tied to Conway. I handed over the folder. No speech, no monologue, just documents, vendor history, procurement trails, breach alerts from industry bulletins, internal comms, code samples with timestamps, and the most damning artifact of all, the policy exception form Tyler signed using a rubber stamp approval from a junior compliance analyst on vacation. The CEO read silently, occasionally glanced at Tyler, who had shrunk into his chair so far you'd think he was trying to tunnel to the parking garage. The CFO leaned in, flipping through Conway's cost justifications. Wait, this outage cost us how much per hour? 80 grand, I said. He blinked. And the board doesn't know? Not yet, I said. They were about to be shown the Q3 results before the feed died. The CEO exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for a decade. And Lang pushed this through, under the radar, I said. I waited until there was undeniable loss before saying anything. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. Said enough. A recognition. The nod between survivors. Tyler tried one last Hail Mary. It was a calculated risk. The CEO cut him off. You don't calculate risk with someone else's backbone holding up your ego. And just like that, the dominoes began to fall. Legal flipped open their laptop. The chair picked up the phone. And Tyler's fate, which had once felt untouchable behind his wall of buzzwords and bootlicking, started cracking like glass. Meanwhile, I sat there, not smiling, not speaking, just watching the plan unfold exactly as designed. One name, 80 grand an hour, and a woman they thought had been shelved in storage. The emergency session was called for 1:00 p.m. No catered lunch, no smiles, no small talk, just 12 people in tailored suits who looked like they'd collectively aged 5 years in the last 2 hours. The lights in the conference room were too bright. Air smelled like burnt nerves, and whatever cologne the general counsel thought made him seem trustworthy. Tyler wasn't there. His seat sat empty at the long end of the table, his nameplate still neatly centered, untouched. A silent little tombstone to hubris. The chair tapped it once, absent-mindedly, then nodded to me. Rachel, walk us through it. It wasn't a request. I stood up, placed my folder on the glass tabletop, opened it with the precision of someone who has waited far too long to be heard. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't pace or gesture or say I told you so. I let the paper speak. Let the ink carry the weight. Because when truth has structure, it doesn't need volume. Page 1, Conway's original onboarding approval, signed by Tyler, bypassing the standard vendor review board. For emergency acceleration, he'd scrawled in red pen. Page 2, the first incident log from my system, where Conway's script failed and my rack silently took over. Timestamped. Verified, unacknowledged. Page 3, an internal Slack message. Tyler to his team, legacy systems are a crutch. I'll kill the last one before the board meeting. We need optics, that word again. Optics, not function, not resilience. Optics. Page 4, procurement memo noting Conway's payment bonus structure, tied to how fast migration completed, not whether it functioned. Page 5 through 20. Pattern system failures, failover triggers, vendor alerts, security flags, and incident reports, all routed around Tyler's access, all ignored, all suppressed. Each one had a sticky note attached, with red tabs for breaches and yellow for policy violations. It looked like a murder scene built out of bureaucracy. By page 21, no one was looking at their phones. By page 30, the CFO had gone pale, jaw clenched so tight you could see the tendons in his neck. He stopped me with a raised hand. You're telling us every outage we've buried this quarter, every compliance delay, every dashboard glitch, it all tied back to this. I turned to the timeline taped inside the folder's back cover. A red line across Q3. Conway's deployment at the start. The data dips. The support tickets. Email threads Tyler marked resolved without answers. And finally, the outage. The blackout. 10:24 a.m. I'm not telling you, I said. I'm showing you. Silence. Legal stood up without a word and walked out of the room, phone already to his ear. The board chair leaned back and exhaled through his nose. And Tyler approved all of this unilaterally. Yes. And when I asked for a review, I was reassigned to Archive 3C. That got a reaction. A quiet, disgusted laugh from the CIO. The kind of laugh that says we all knew he was dangerous, we just didn't expect it to be this measurable. The CTO finally spoke. Why didn't you come forward earlier? Because no one listens until something breaks. I held his gaze. Now it's broken. The CEO returned to the room like a storm cloud in loafers. He walked straight past Tyler's empty chair, didn't look at it, didn't acknowledge it. Just said, he's not answering. Eagle is drafting options. The board murmured, not loudly, not dramatically, but the kind of murmurs that means signatures are coming. Contracts will be shredded. Emails will be subpoenaed. The chair turned to me again. Is there anything else we should see? I nodded once. Reached into the folder's side pocket. Pulled out the internal memo Tyler had asked me to sign, the one that would have cleared him of all liability. Unmarked, unsigned, pristine. I slid it across the table. CFO, read the clause. Reread it. Then softly. He tried to offload responsibility before the crash even happened. No, I said. He knew it would happen. He just didn't care who caught the fallout. And for the first time since I'd been buried in Archive 3C, I watched a room full of men take me seriously. Righteous rage, maybe, but all they saw was professionalism. And that made it hit even harder. The CEO re-entered like a verdict wearing a suit. Didn't sit, he didn't smile. He leaned down to the chair and whispered something brief, a sentence, maybe two. The chair blinked once, then slowly turned to the rest of the board. As of now, he said, Tyler Lang is no longer employed by Caro Tech. Terminated for cause. No reaction from the room, no gasps. Just a shared, heavy quiet, the kind that lands after thunder and before fire. Not for the outage, the chair clarified, but for vendor kickbacks, gross negligence, falsified asset decommission logs. He paused, then turned his eyes on me. You knew this would happen? I didn't hesitate. Only after he pulled the plug, I said. I warned him once. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was clean, like something had been cut from the room with surgical precision. No one looked at Tyler's nameplate. No one touched the untouched coffee cup in front of his empty chair. It sat there, steaming faintly, irrelevant now. Folder was still open in front of me. I slowly closed it, clipped it shut, and slid it aside. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't waver. I'd imagined this moment, but not with fireworks, just with order, like the sound of a door locking behind someone who thought it only swung one way. And then the final card landed. The CFO, flipping through a separate binder, stopped on a page marked with a blue tab. We had approved a legacy system retention clause, it slowly for fallback infrastructure. To mitigate risk during transition quarters. The chair looked over. You mean the redundancy clause? Yes. If legacy systems were actively engaged during a board-certified failure, the designated system owner receives a mitigation bonus. He turned toward me. And per these records, the fallback system that stabilized Conway's failure was Rachel's. I said nothing. Not out of modesty, out of precision. The chair cleared his throat. Rachel, is that system still operational? It will be, I said, once I plug it back in. A few of them actually smiled, tight, restrained things. The kind of smiles people wear when they realize the fireproof safe was real after all, and someone had quietly kept the combination. The CFO closed his binder. We'll process the bonus through the Risk Mitigation Fund. Retroactive to the first recorded failover. Someone else did the math under their breath. Another person muttered, Jesus. And then the meeting dissolved. Chairs scraped back. Phones lit up. The legal team ducked into the hallway like predators on a scent trail. The storm had passed, but the damage report was just beginning. I gathered my folder, smoothed out my jacket, and turned to leave. The chair stopped me with one last glance. Rachel, what do you want to do next? I paused. Go back to Archive 3C, I said. Unplug what's left. Burn the tapes. Maybe take a walk. The chair nodded. You'll keep the title, of course. And the system's done, I said. Let them build a new one, this time with grown-ups. And I left. No applause, no parade. Just the feeling of doors swinging open where they used to lock. Of weight lifted by truth, not vindictiveness. Of bridges burned where they needed to be, and earth salted so no one could rebuild on top of the same lies. I got back to Archive 3C, looked looked at the rack one last time. Still quiet, loyal, I whispered thanks. Then I pulled the last plug, not with ceremony, just with finality. Outside, the afternoon was warm. The air was sharp with autumn. I walked out without a badge check, past people who had no idea what had just happened upstairs. And as I crossed the lobby, I heard someone behind me mutter, "Wasn't she the one from?" I didn't turn. I just smiled and walked into the rest of my life. Thanks for joining the fun, you office survivors. Subscribe for more switch-flicking drama. Let's make your former coworkers sweat.